Hello everyone, we turn to Ways of the World, a brief global history with sources, as we continue our study of colonial encounters in Asia, Africa, and Oceania with the second wave of European conquests. Okay, so the period 1750 to 1900 saw a second distinct phase of European colonial conquest. It focused on Asia, Africa, and Oceania. Several new players from Europe are now involved: Germany, Italy, Belgium, and even outside of Europe, the United States and Japan. In general, Europeans preferred informal control. The competition between European powers drove outright conquest in some circumstances. And that led to the establishment of this second wave European empires. It was based on military force or the threat of using it. Over the 19th century, Europeans developed an enormous firepower advantage, repeating rifles and machine guns, and numerous wars of conquest are part of this. The Westerners almost always won. And territories became colonies in a variety of ways. Hunter-gatherers, agricultural peoples, and pastoralists were incorporated into complex civilizations for the first time. India and Indonesia grew from interaction with European trading firms. Most of Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific Islands, there was a deliberate conquest. Africa, decentralized societies without a formal state structure were the hardest to conquer, like the Zulu Army and the Boer War resistance in South Africa. American, British, French, Dutch, and German competition for islands in the Pacific eventually drew in Australia and Chile. We see the colonization of Australia and New Zealand, similar to the colonization of North America. But this is accompanied with massive European settlement and diseases killing off most of the native population as they became settler colonies. There's expansion into Siberia, Amazonia, Hawaii, and Polynesia, and that brought new diseases to isolated communities and mass death. And there's American expansion as well. For example, the imperialist war with Mexico, the removal and extermination of Native Americans, and the Spanish-American War and the annexation of the Philippines. Other examples: Taiwan and Korea. The Japanese takeover was done European style. Liberia was settled by freed U.S. slaves who became a colonizing elite. And Ethiopia and Siam, or Thailand, avoided colonization via diplomacy and military prowess. And there's also Asian and African societies that generated a wide range of responses to that European threat. Okay, so Colonial Asia in the early 20th century. So by the early 20th century, several of the great population centers of Asia had come under the colonial control of Britain, the Netherlands, France, the United States, or Japan. So which Southeast Asian kingdom maintained its independence from European colonial powers? Well, Siam remained independent. Right. So what geographical and political barriers made direct confrontations between the British Empire in South Asia and the Chinese Empire unlikely? Large mountain ranges like the Hindu Kush and the Himalayas, as well as large seas like that of the South China Sea, served to minimize Chinese and British interactions in South Asia, thereby limiting conflict. All right, conquest and resistance in colonial Africa. So by the early 20th century, the map of Africa reflected the outcome of the scramble for Africa, a conquest that was heavily resisted in many places. In what regions of Africa were British colonies concentrated? Where were French colonies concentrated? Well, the British dominated East Africa in an effort to establish territorial continuity, quote unquote, from the Cape to Cairo, as was the saying. And French colonies, meanwhile, were concentrated in West Africa. What does the map tell historians about the African responses to the quote-unquote scramble for Africa? There were many uprisings, most of which were subdued. Only Ethiopia, which became completely landlocked, remained independent. And this concludes our study of a second wave of European conquests. I will see you guys for Under European Rule. Oh, whoops.